Now let's hear from your co-host.
Do any of you men have any eggs or the possibility of carrying a fetus? How dare you talk about what a fetus wants? You have no idea. Now, I'm fine if you disagree with abortion. I have no problem with that. My problem comes when you tell me what I need to do with my doctor and my family. How dare you? How dare you?
Let's hear from your co-host. Do any of you men have the ability to carry a fetus? How dare you talk about what a fetus needs when you have no idea? Now, I'm fine with people disagreeing on abortion. I have no issue with that. What bothers me is when others tell me what to do with my doctor and family. How dare you? Now, as a counterpoint to Whoopi Goldberg, did you know that back in 2017, she received a GLAAD Media Award for executive producing Strut, a transgender modeling show? She won the award for advocating for trans rights and against those trying to roll them back. Oops, this is why I love intersectionality. Here we are, caught in the middle of a culture war, where a bunch of men dressing up and claiming to be women are trying to convince others they can give birth and chest feed. Then Whoopi Goldberg, passionate about abortion rights, accidentally tells the truth: only women can give birth. Only women have the biological capability to carry a child. They say never to get in the way of your enemies when they're making a mistake, and even a broken clock is right twice a day. So thanks, Whoopi, for proving that even those who get it wrong can sometimes understand basic biology. And now for my final point, which I think is crucial in the current abortion debate. We live in a culture where men are often accused of not stepping up. In fact, this week it was revealed that only 18% of American households today feature a nuclear family where a married mother and father are raising children. If not, the biggest epidemic in this country is fatherlessness. But why should men be expected to step up when women are telling them they don't have to? Why should men feel responsible when mainstream culture and media keep sending the message that, beyond sex, men have no role or responsibility in their children's lives? How can anyone logically explain that a baby is 100% the responsibility of the woman as it grows inside of her, and then once the baby is born, the responsibility suddenly becomes a 50/50 split? Can a man stand before a judge at a child support hearing and claim, "Your Honor, it was her body, so it was her choice to have the child"? Of course not. That would be absurd. If a man is called a deadbeat dad for not taking responsibility for his child's life, the same should be true for a woman who wants nothing to do with a child while it's growing inside of her. My body, my choice. This becomes a convenient excuse for a woman to avoid responsibility, essentially making her a deadbeat mom in this context. Honestly, this isn't about whether you're pro-choice or pro-life. It's about negative arguments. The arguments coming from the left right now are completely out of touch with reason. Let's start with Joy Bihar's nonsense. It's a fascinating contradiction. On one hand, you have the left arguing for full autonomy over women's bodies, but on the other, they ignore the reality of personal responsibility.
All right, counterpoint to you, Whoopi Goldberg. Number two. Did you guys know back at home, by the way, that in 2017, Whoopi Goldberg received a GLAAD Media Award for executively producing a show called Strut? It was a transgendered modeling show. She won the award for speaking up for trans rights and against those trying to roll them back. Oopsies! This is why I love intersectionality. Here we are in the middle of a vicious culture war where a bunch of men playing dress up and trying to convince people that they are women and can give birth. And
sex is everywhere. You can't watch an aspirin commercial without some form of sexual content, and nearly every program, especially on streaming platforms, seems to feature soft porn. It's all over the place and it sells everything. Yet, when it comes to the reality of pregnancy, a certain group on the right, along with religious zealots, seem to be completely out of touch with the consequences of sex. I don't even think she's aware of the complexities, but we'll pretend there's an H in her name for the sake of this argument. Now on to counterpoint number one. Yes, Joy, you're correct that sex is everywhere and our culture is in a pretty sick place. That's not an argument, it's a diagnosis. We have an increasingly unhealthy culture in America. People on the right, especially religious groups, understand this well. We recognize that when promiscuity is normalized, it leads to unfulfilling, unprotected sex. No, we understand the consequences. Children and life are the natural results. It seems to me it's the secular left-wing zealots who have lost sight of the real consequences of unprotected sex, especially when they make it seem like an abortion is just a convenient escape. Did you know, Joy, that before federally funded sex education programs were introduced in schools in the 1970s and before Roe v. Wade in 1973, teenage pregnancy rates in this country were steadily declining over the course of 12 years? What we on the right understand is that there's something called sexually transmitted insanity, the normalization of casual, non-committal sex. This culture has done no one any favors, especially young women who end up pregnant and are then pressured into making life-altering decisions that are packaged as responsible choices. Now let's get to the racism embedded in these arguments. Imagine for a second if a headline read, "How do we save the world from black men?" The uproar would be immediate, but somehow it's acceptable to vilify straight white men. Society has reached a point where it's okay to be hateful, to chase people out of restaurants, to publish articles suggesting the eradication of white men, as long as it's aimed at conservatives. This is where we are today.
We currently have a culture where men are routinely accused of not stepping up to the plate. In fact, just this week, it was announced that only 18% of households in America today feature a nuclear family unit, a married mother and a father raising children. Make no mistake, father absence is one of the biggest, if not the biggest epidemic that we face in this country today. But why are we expecting men to step up to the plate when we have women that are telling them that they don't have to? Why should men step up when the message that is ringing out loud and clear from mainstream culture and media is that beyond sex, men have no responsibility or say in the lives of their children? I mean, how on earth can someone logically explain how a baby is 100% the property of a woman as it grows inside of her? From the moment that the baby is born, it requires a 50-50 split.
This is what frustrates me. Black conservatives like me are out here saying that the way some black liberals are acting is a direct insult to real black history. It's as if they want to paint a picture that we are still living in an overtly racist time, and that's just not true. In fact, being black in America today comes with privileges that many people are blind to. It's a great time to be black in America because you can get away with things others can't. It's remarkable how certain individuals, despite openly perpetuating deeply offensive and racist statements, continue to thrive in the public eye. Take Don Lemon, for example. He's made some of the most divisive and racially charged remarks on air this year, yet somehow he manages to hold onto a top-rated show at CNN. Granted, calling anything at CNN top-rated is a stretch, especially given their ongoing struggles with viewership, but among the sea of failing shows, Lemon's remains one of the most prominent. It's a stark reflection of a media landscape where toxic rhetoric is not just tolerated but often rewarded. But how do we start to reverse this? How do we restore some sense of balance and decency in a society increasingly defined by division and hostility? First, we need to recognize that change, especially in a deeply entrenched cultural system, requires a shift in the way we think and act. Just as it took white people to stand up alongside black Americans during the civil rights movement to challenge the pervasive injustices of the time, it will now take black people, along with others from marginalized groups, to speak out and say that what is happening in our society is simply wrong. We are beginning to see this with black conservatives who are increasingly standing up against the ideological tide. It's easy to be vilified, especially on social media, where people can spew hate with little accountability. I can personally attest to the barrage of vitriol directed at me on a daily basis. It's no longer about simply having a different opinion, it's about being relentlessly attacked for daring to oppose the mainstream narrative. The ugliness is real, and it's undeniable. But this is where the fight must begin, by demanding that enough is enough. But it's not just about black conservatives, it's also about gay people, other marginalized communities, and anyone who feels the sting of falsehoods and stereotypes being hurled at them. Take Jussie Smollett, for instance. The man perpetuated one of the most harmful hoaxes in recent memory. His claims that he was the target of racial and homophobic slurs were not only patently false, but they also reinforced the worst kind of stereotypes about gay men, especially men of color. Smollett's actions were not only an insult to the truth, but they also spread damaging narratives that contribute to the further stigmatization of marginalized groups. Smollett's actions are a clear example of how important it is for all of us to speak up against these harmful trends. Everyone, whether they're gay, straight, black, white, or anything in between, needs to find their voice right now. Racism is not acceptable, no matter who the target is. And as we see with examples like the Gillette razor ads, the Brett Kavanaugh controversy, and the Smollett hoax, racism is becoming increasingly one-sided in our society, targeting white people in a way that is both reckless and deeply dangerous. What's more troubling is that this racism is being actively endorsed and supported by the very institutions that are supposed to uphold truth and justice in society. It's being blessed by our media, Hollywood, and perhaps most alarmingly, by politicians on the left. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, continuously plays the victim, falsely accusing those who challenge her views of harassment and catcalling. She even went so far as to say that Ben Shapiro had catcalled her simply for challenging her to a debate. This narrative perpetuates the idea of the straight white male as a predator, a stereotype that is as baseless as it is dangerous. And yet she continues to push this narrative, as do many of her fellow leftist politicians. Kamala Harris, too, contributes to this divisive rhetoric. Her claim that we are living in MAGA times completely ignores the reality of what the MAGA movement stands for. If we're really going to talk about MAGA, let's set the record straight. MAGA is the only movement in this country that genuinely promotes unity, not based on skin color or background, but on an American philosophy. At MAGA rallies, you'll find people of every race, religion, and walk of life united by the belief in the American ideals of freedom, opportunity, and justice for all. It's a movement that transcends race and focuses on what makes this country great. When you're surrounded by conservatives, when you're in a room full of people who proudly wave the American flag, you don't see color, you see a shared belief in the principles that make America unique. On the other hand, the left is increasingly focused on division. The media, Hollywood, and left-wing politicians thrive on creating a narrative of hatred and fear. It's not about unity or healing, it's about ensuring that the divide between people only grows wider. This division is strategically maintained because when people are angry and divided, it's easier for those in power to control the narrative. We've seen this play out time and again, particularly when dealing with high-profile incidents like the Covington Catholic boys controversy or the smear campaign against Brett Kavanaugh. It's becoming more and more clear that much of what we're being told by the left is either misleading or outright false. When I tweeted about the Jussie Smollett hoax before the facts were fully known, I was met with scorn. But as always, the facts eventually came to light, and we learned just how deeply this hoax had been rooted in deception and lies. The left's response to these revelations is always the same: deny, deflect, and smear. It's a pattern that's becoming all too familiar and one that needs to be challenged head-on. We can't continue to let this kind of toxic narrative dominate our culture. It's time to stand up and speak out. It's time for all of us, black, white, gay, straight, conservative, and liberal, to take responsibility for the kind of society we want to create. This defends truth, decency, and the values that make this country strong, not just one group. We need to reject the politics of division and hatred and instead embrace the ideals of unity, respect, and mutual understanding. As I wrap up this rant, I want to leave you with this thought: Jussie Smollett is a liar, and so is Christine Blasey Ford. Both of their actions have caused irreparable harm to the credibility of those who genuinely suffer from racial and sexual violence. The time has come for us all to stand up and demand better for ourselves, for our children, and for our country. Enough is enough.
I don't think she knows that it's not pronounced shesh, but we'll pretend that there's an H somewhere in there. For counterpoint number one, I want to say, yes, Joy Behar, you are correct. Sex is everywhere. Our culture is sick. That isn't an argument, that's a diagnosis. We have an increasingly sick culture here in America. Religious zealots and or people on the right very much understand that reality. We understand that when a culture promulgates promiscuity, it leads to people engaging in unfulfilling, unprotected sex. Far from your assessment that we don't understand what happens when you have sex, we understand exactly what happens. Children are the consequence. Life is the consequence. It would seem to me that it's the atheist zealots, the ones who have normalized sex-laden aspirin commercials, that don't quite understand what happens when you have unprotected sex. And then, when they find out, they go, whoops, well, good thing I learned in health class that I can just get an abortion to deal with it.